In recent times, the Australian federal budget has given much room for debate throughout the country, and as a result, there is no shortage of reporting it in tabloid and more traditional news formats. It is the issue of budget and the way that it is reported that raises the issue of media framing and the way that ownership and the like affect communication and our news content. When we're viewing the news, we must ask ourselves, to what extent has the media that we are being exposed to been altered by ownership and by the way that it's traditionally being replaced with alternative media formats? Objectivity and bias play a large role in determining what people believe to be the social norm in most cases. Throughout the news, and this is particularly true for this case study because the budget has a lot to do with the political party that is in power, and since it is a newsworthy issue, the way that the opposition views the news has a great deal to do with the content that we are delivered. The way in which media frames current events plays upon the general public. A news story can have a number of frames applied by separate news bodies. The public is forced to interpret the story by the way it's been cast, using relative but separate frames. The techniques of framing are as followed: selection, emphasis, exclusion, and elaboration. Tankard, Hendrickson, Silberman, Bliss, and Garnham in 1991 defined framing as a central organizing idea for news content that supplies a content and suggests what the issue is through the use of selection, emphasis, exclusion, and elaboration. Selection is used to determine which pieces of information will be the most newsworthy and are headed in the right direction for the frame that is intended for the particular piece. Emphasis is used to frame the text to possibly exaggerate the main facts to viewers who will therefore interpret and then be manipulated. Exclusion is applied in order to frame the text in a light that will reveal the subject in a way that the writer or governing body is trying to achieve. Exclusion is applied as to omit information that would not coexist with the frame that would be subsequently displayed. Elaboration is used to highlight specific parts of a story that will be also of use to a particular framing method. To fully be able to understand the way framing has been changed, representation of the issue, it's best to overview it to give my argument scope. The main crux of my issue here is that Tony Abbott is wanting to delegate $4 billion to have as national savings, stating that Prime Minister Rudd is recklessly spending, with the Prime Minister, according to the Australian newspaper on the 13th of May, describing Mr Abbott as having a breathtakingly low knowledge of economics. These two news broadcasts on budget that I'm going to look at in detail are the ABC broadcast entitled Budget Cautious but Credible and NBN's Today program's 2010 Federal Budget Overview. To show the differences in framing in two different channels with different owners of biases, as well as the way that an alternative news source shows the story in comparison to the mainstream way of reporting. These will be Billy Blog's Alternative Economic Thinking blog's post entitled Federal Budget 2010-11, A Sad Document, and the Daily Telegraph article Chill Wind of Funding Cuts Roars Past Kevin Rudd by Alison Rain. First, let's take a look at the ABC broadcast. Very much the government's strength in economic management and obviously has a focus on health. Will do the heavy lifting that fiscal policy needs to do to cope with rising inflationary pressures and the recovering economy, and that is very. Now let's compare this to the NBN broadcast. Again, the government will spend this morning selling its third and most restrained budget, as expected to deliver a massive boost to health, but no other real pre-election sweepers. For more, we cross to today's financial reporter, Rob Greenwood, in Canberra. All right, Rob, break it down for us. What is the budget mean for the average person?
Well, for the average person right now, there are good things in here because
Firstly, we can see a huge difference in these two sources. Firstly, the ABC is getting straight to the point and there's no cutting to and from the journalist commentary. It is also interesting to note the fact that the advertising is the first thing that's played upon hearing the NBN broadcast. In this case, it was an Optus ad. If advertising is driving the creation of NBN news broadcasts, does sponsorship have a large effect on what will be reported? In light of the fact that there will be a sway depending on who owns the particular station. ABC is trying to inform, whereas the Today program is trying to entertain while delivering news. The purposes are different and therefore the content will be altered also. This is a major part of media framing. Comparing an alternative media source to a mainstream media source also will show us many differences in perspective. The following is a quote from the Daily Telegraph article, written by Alison Ree. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd slashed childcare rebates and cancer funding but spent an extra $12 million on his own department in Tuesday's budget. While Labor's front bench had to make savage cuts to programs to get the budget back to black, Mr Rudd lifted funding to the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet to support delivery of the government's reform agenda. Spending has been slashed from all other sectors. The staggering list of sneaky savings are buried in budget papers. In Tuesday's budget lock-up, even public servants were embarrassed to discuss the cuts. The fact that the journalist here is using language such as sneaky savings is suggesting to us that a bias is inevitable. This is also backed up by the fact that there's an advertisement on the same page of the article as published, featuring a link to member of the opposition Joe Hockey's Daily Telegraph blog. This is showing us that there is a bias that is associated, and the readers must be discerning due to the effects of media framing. The following is a quote from the alternative media structure by Billy Blogg. Billy states, "Good points. The investment in more apprenticeships is excellent, as is the increased funding for regional health and aged care services. Given the aged care crisis in the Hunter, these moves are welcome. But the main health reforms are uncertain given the failure to reach agreement with the states. With an election looming and the government looking vulnerable, some enticements might have been expected. But the boring budget reflects the current suspicion about the government's track record on spending. They are instead hoping that the misperceptions they have peddled about the need to get the budget into surplus are believed. Overall score 4 out of 10, too much emphasis on the surplus and not enough emphasis on jobs and living standards." Billy here is giving his own opinion. This is why many alternative media sources do without the issue of ownership playing a large effect on biases. In terms of framing, you're more likely to experience the techniques if you are observing mass media sphere. The alternative to a large body does not govern media, and the individual authors have the rights and freedoms to make their own decisions and go against the mass media view. That is not to say that there is no trace of framing in the alternative media sphere all the time. This is where we can see the notion of techniques of framing occurring throughout the news media. Mainstream and alternative media use devices including headlines, leads, pull quotes, and nut graphs. As Severin and Tankard in Effects of Mass Communication point out, this is evident via the news examples concerning the budget issue, because when budget announcements are made, we can see a majority of airtime and the previously mentioned headlines, leads, etc. in regards to the issue also. These devices sometimes fit in the category of advanced organizers. The concept of advanced organizers is based on the idea that information stored in people's heads is organized in a hierarchy with specific information grouped under broader principles, as quoted by Bell in 1960. These devices are at work within the news media in regards to this issue. They have a predominant influence within the general public due to the fact that they can manipulate the responder to view the story in the way that the frame has been positioned. Stephen D. Reese, Oscar H. Gandy, August E. Grant state that both the mainstream media and the alternative media bodies frame in a way predominantly similar to the following. 1. Frames define problems. 2. Frames diagnose causes. 3. Frames make moral judgments. And 4. Frames suggest remedies. In the case of the budget issue, frames define the problems that are concerning and occurring within the government, the issue of reporting the story with biases to be specific. The media then begins to define the causes of specific problems within the party in charge